This is Steve with Rhapsodia Cosplay. I am going to show you how I usually will scale an image of a weapon or a piece of armor up to a pattern to be used as a overlaid piece in order to cut it out in either foam or wood or whatever you decide to use. Today we're going to be using one of the keyblades from Kingdom Hearts for one of our friends under the name Full Elven. So first thing I usually do is get rid of as much of the white edge as possible on each of your four sides, because what we're going to do is take this file, take this image, we're going to format it and come up here in the right hand corner. It may be different on older models, on older program models. And we're going to extend the width to whatever size your sword or armor piece is going to be. For this, we're going to be bumping this sword up to about 3.5 foot. So I'm going to bump this up to 40 inches. So as you can see, our actual paper size over here is grossly disproportionate to the size of the actual sword pattern that we're creating. That's because this is going to be an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper with a border, and your 11 by your 40 inches, so that's 11, that's 11, that's 11, etc., etc. So, now that we've got this exploded up to the right size, you have to be able to print it as many times as you can to make an actual pattern design. There's some patterns, like the other swords that we are working on for Full Elven, where this portion becomes very symmetrical and hard to line up, and I'll show you what I mean in a minute. We're going to take this slide right over here. We're going to Control-C, copy it, and Control-V, paste it. So we've now created a duplicate of that slide. And if you look over here, I'll show you easier on slideshow mode. You've got this whole ring, you have the top half of this ring, you have maybe the top line on this part. So for this one, we're going to take and drag this up. And I usually leave myself a little bit of shadow, and what I mean by that is you want this portion to show up a little bit here, because that way you don't have to have this line when you cut it exactly flat, because unless you have a paper cutter you're going to have a little bit of issue getting that line exactly straight. And so you'll cut this line to get rid of the border piece, because printers obviously can't print all the way to the edge on each piece of paper. So you're going to cut this edge, you're going to tape it over the top of this one, lining up these two halves as best you can. And then when you get to the next one, you're going to do the same thing, and you'll line this piece up with this piece. Now usually what I'll do here, when you have this much on both halves, is I'll take this middle piece, the slide 2 of 3, and I'll center it a little, just so you have enough overlap to play with. So now you can very easily see all three portions of that sword handle. So now we're going to take slide 3. Actually, let's go back to slide 1. We're going to copy it. We're going to paste it at the end. And the reason we're pasting it at the end is now we're going to take this right about here where the circle ends and drag it back to where this slide ends. So down here you'll see we can almost just barely get that edge of the circle, as you'll see on this slide. And then when we copy this one, Now here's where things get tricky. If I were to just click and drag it, I could move left or right. So usually once I've moved off of keeping this edge even with the paper, I'll just use my arrow keys until I get this lined up with the bottom edge of the paper. So now we'll take this one and get it evenly centered. Now, given the size of this, you may be able to trim off, say drag this slide up a little bit, get rid of that corner since you know it's there, and get the whole handle in one frame. That way you can reduce the amount of paper and ink you use, and do the same here. That way you can just line up those two sheets and just remember that you have the diamond. But for sake of argument, we're going to leave those as this is. So at the moment, we're up to 6 pieces of paper to make up our pattern. You can see as I move this around where that slide is going to be. So now we're going to take this and I'm going to drag it across. And since you can see here, you have a big old empty panel, we're just going to skip straight up. And usually what I'll do, if we go back over here and you look to the side and you see we have both of these points isolated within that panel, we can, as long as we get that point, we can get this whole segment all in that one frame and not have to worry about all this white space or all of this white space. So we'll make another one. And from here we're going to get this next segment, which again we left off with this tip. So now we've got a duplicate of that tip to line things up. We still need to get these tips and these tips. So probably 3 more slides. So I'll copy this. Copy it again. And once more. So now you've got a paper pattern of every piece of the sword on 11 different sheets of paper. Like I said, you can do it in less, you can do it in more. Really depends on how stingy you want to be about your paper and ink. This is just a black and white photo. You definitely want a minimalist, colorless, if possible, image as best you can. You definitely want a flat-on photo, because if you get it from an angle, your dimensions are going to be skewed. It's going to always look like you're taking photos of that weapon or armor piece at that angle. The full elven keyblade. And I will save that for her. And then when you go to print this, you don't have to, but what I usually do is I will print it at, I'm not used to this new software, there we go. Borderless, as close to borderless as possible. That way it will keep this as close to accurately sized as possible, because you see right now it's trying to print this with a border of white around the entire thing. That one's a really good one for demonstrating that. You're going to have to trim that off of most of them so that you can line them up properly. This is now our sword. So we're going to move this sword and try and create a pattern of this sword. The sword is currently 40 inches long. Let's just make it fit on one page wide. Now, I could very easily just do exactly what I did. But when I go to line these up, it's going to become very hard to know which one I'm looking at. Am I looking at one or two? One or two, one or two, one or two. So usually what I'll do in this case, with something very large like this, and very symmetrical, very hard to tell which end is forward, which end is which, I will give myself a placement mark of sorts. So here, if I were to be making two different slides, top and bottom, you would need an X of some sort. So you can line up 4 sheets. If you're just using left and right, you can use an arrow. And usually what I'll do is I will change the color of the arrow depending on which portion I'm using. So this is our handle. And for sake of argument, I will add a line to the arrow. So now when we switch to print preview, this little arrow is going to mark where our hilt left off. So we're going to copy this and paste it like we did before. And now here we're going to Control A and grab all of it and drag all of it. So now in the print preview we still have that line and that arrow, so we can match these two ends up. And I will then continue with the next line and arrow set. And I'll select all of it again. And the reason I used an arrow is because one time I had a sword, I could not tell which way the design was facing, and I almost made the sword backwards, so that would not have been a good thing. So that one's yellow. And almost done. So you're not going to need it on the last one. Whoops. And that's the problem. You want to always Control A and select everything before you drag it. That way you don't end up dragging just a portion. So now, when I go to a print preview, you can see this is the handle, and that is going to continue and show you every step of the way which way is forward and where those pieces are going to line up. But anyway, that is generally how I go about scaling up a small picture to make a large weapon. Too long, didn't watch. Take a small picture, scale it up evenly. This should change automatically. And then copy it as many times as you need to make sure that you print every piece of it. Anyway, sorry that was long-winded, but a lot of people have asked me now, and I wanted to make sure that you guys understood how it worked. And I needed to get that done for Jace. So now she can have this to make her keyblade. So check out her Twitch. I'm sure she's going to be starting to work on that soon. Anyway, we will catch you guys next time. Have a good night.